Alright, I'm making this video to show you 5 things you may have missed about The Witcher's signs in The Witcher 3. Despite being called a Quen Noob several times, sign builds are still dear to me, and so I thought I should make this video. Before we begin though, let me shamelessly plug my Details Missed playlist, which you should probably check out if you haven't. It's got a whole bunch of hopefully interesting Witcher videos. And with that out of the way, let's get started with thing you may have missed number 1.
Horses work in witchcraft! Get him!
Did you know that Quen shield is an umbrella? Well, not really, but it actually has a unique animation when it's used during rainy or snowy weather. Normally it looks like this, but if it's raining and if you look close enough, you can see the visual effects of raindrops hitting the shield. The animation is not terribly well suited for snow, I suppose, but if you are in Skellige and it's snowing, you can spot the same effect.
I don't know that I'll make for engaging company. In truth, I rarely talk to men.
We don't have to talk.
Now sadly, it doesn't actually seem to protect you from rain, as you still get wet even if you go out with a shield. Right here, for example, I got into a house and I waited until it started raining. As you can see, I'm currently dry. I pop the shield, I go out for a moment, and I am now wet. So it's purely cosmetic, but I thought it's a cool little detail nevertheless. And before we move away from the Quen, I would like to bring another sign from the books, specifically the Heliotrope, or Heliotrope, however it's pronounced. It was apparently supposed to be in The Witcher 3, but it was cut in development. And my theory about why it's not in the third game is that they essentially merged the Heliotrope and Quen signs together. They are separate in the books, and forgive me, but off the top of my head I can't recall the specific differences. If I remember correctly, Geralt used both of them when he fought... Minor spoilers for Season 2, I suppose.
There's a Bruxa in the house.
So he used both of them when fighting Verena. I believe he used one of them against her scream attack and the other one against her physical attacks. So I would assume that one of them is supposed to protect against kinetic energy and the other one against magic. And therefore The Witcher 3 simply merged the two together and called them Quen, since the sign is effective against both attacks and magic in the game. Oh, and I almost forgot, the Heliotrope sign is actually in The Witcher 2. It takes a while to unlock, and the way it's portrayed is a bit of a mixture between the Quen shield and the Yrden, I suppose. You create a dome around you, and it slows the enemies inside. It's not quite like the books, but it's pretty cool.
I'm looking for a whore.
Okay, that's all I had for number 1. Moving on to number 2. This one is about the Yrden sign. Did you know that you can actually modify the way it looks? I bet many people missed that one since it's a unique feature of the Grandmaster Griffin armor. If you collect the full set, the 6-piece set bonus not only improves the size and strength of your Yrden, but also gives it a slightly different look. It adds a kind of circular outline to the area of effect, and I quite like how it looks actually. I will bring up Netflix again, where the sign this Witcher casts is clearly Yrden, and it is likely inspired by the shape of the Grandmaster Griffin set. It's a bit of a shame that it's usually underused, the armor set. A good amount of players claim that it makes Geralt look fat, and I suppose there is some truth to that, but it's also realistic. And since I already brought Yrden, the Vesemir anime and the books, there is yet another connection between them. I believe I talked about it in my Details Missed about the film, but let's mention it again. And it's the fact that in the books, the Yrden sign is first introduced as a means of holding the Striga at bay, which is somewhat similar to how the cross in Christianity supposedly wards off forces of evil and whatnot. And so Netflix likely picked that up quite literally, since what the old Witcher is doing here with the Yrden sign is basically an exorcism. He even calls the monster possessing the woman a demon at one point.
A demon plagues this woman.
So there we go, moving on to number 3 and the Igni sign. I've got a couple of things for you here as well. First off, contrary to the default Igni, the alternate Firestorm variety is actually quite useful against enemies with shields. Just activate it and hold it for a couple of seconds against someone who carries a shield, and he will catch on fire, which in turn will force him to drop his guard and become vulnerable. Now you might say, why not simply do it with the Axii sign? Well, for one, the Igni just looks cooler, in my opinion, and you can also use this strategy against multitude of shielded opponents at once.
You'll never learn.
And let's not forget all the potential for roleplay when it comes to friendly fire.
Geralt,
Another somewhat curious thing about the Igni is that there is a single occasion where Geralt says the name of the sign when using it. It happens early on in White Orchard during the Devil by the Well contract.
Igni.
Honestly, I never thought much of it, but in the Netflix anime we also have one case early on where Vesemir uses Igni and once again says the word. Then, just as it is in The Witcher 3, he never says it anymore when using the sign. But it gets even more interesting because, as far as I recall, there is also a single unique case in the books where the same thing happens. And it's once again early on in the first book in that very same fight against Verina. When Geralt uses one of his signs, the Heliotrope or the Quen, it was said that he shouts something. I really need to look this up, don't I? Okay, so it's apparently when he uses the Quen. But then, throughout the whole book series, I don't think we ever see this happen anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I might be, to be honest. Now, another thing is that a couple of books later, Yennefer explains how signs work.
terribly sorry, but why must I hear this?
And she makes note that you don't really need any magical knowledge to use them. You just focus really hard and you make the sign with your hand. So I'm not sure if this is a bit of a plot hole or a mistranslation. I mean, I guess it could simply be a thing where shouting the name of the sign helps you focus. But regardless, tell me what you think about all of this. And speaking of the name, Igni clearly comes from the Latin word for fire, but what's more curious is that the shape of the sign is also the alchemical symbol of the element of fire. And with that said, we transition into number 4, because if you draw a horizontal line through the symbol of fire, you get the one for air, which coincidentally is the symbol for the Aard sign in the games, which can indeed put out fires. Some might even say it goes too far.
Fucking candles placed right next to the quest givers and fucking tavern owners.
And it can even freeze enemies if you spec into the right mutation during Blood and Wine. And speaking of frozen enemies, here's a bit of an exploit you may have missed. Just sheathe your weapon and punch them. That'll do some crazy damage. Another thing people keep asking me about is, how the hell am I doing this crazy AoE thing? Well, this is simply the look of the fully upgraded Aard. When you unlock the final shockwave skill, it will add an electricity effect to both the normal and the AoE version of the Aard, and it'll do some damage as well. What else is there to say about the Aard? It can knock people off from cliffs. It's also heavily overused in the Vesemir anime. Okay, finally we get to the last sign in the games, Axii.
Yeah, useful sign, Axii. A couple of road robbers stopped me. One pointed a crossbow at me, and the other started rummaging through my satchel. I made the man with the crossbow shoot his friend, then hang himself.
Tell me, you always been such a cynical bastard?
No, I was adorable before Vesemir brought me to Kaer Morhen.
I'm not sure if it's heavily related to water, but still, it is based on the alchemical symbol of water. Perhaps because it can calm people down? Who knows? Oh, and by the way, Quen is based on Earth. I think I didn't mention that. But back to the Axii, one interesting thing about it, which I learned from several of you guys, is that when you use it during dialogue, Geralt draws the letters for Axii in American Sign Language, which, if true, is quite the cool detail indeed.
Haven't done anything to you, so just calm down.
And speaking of using Axii in conversations, here's something I have realized, and it's the fact that despite giving more XP, it often makes the dialogue less interesting.
More like top cuckold in Redania now.
Top... What? You wait! You car! You rogue! You dickhead! You just wait!
So I do encourage you to try playing without the Axii Delusion skill, especially on your second or third playthrough, plus it also frees up a spot for something else. And speaking of other things you can do with the sign, the puppet ability can have some cool use cases. I personally use it quite rarely, but one thing I have noticed about it is that it doesn't affect Bruxae. On the other hand, it does affect a wide variety of monsters, including other vampires like Katakans, for example. Now you might say it's just for gameplay purposes, and it could be the case. However, the sign does not behave the same way it does on bosses who are immune to it. For example, if you try puppeting Imlerith, literally nothing happens, but when you cast it on a Bruxa or an Alp, it's different, they still get a little dazed by it. Now, why am I going on about this Bruxa stuff? Well, in lore, the Bruxae are supposed to possess mind-controlling / mind-altering powers, and since the Axii is a simple attempt at doing just that, I think it would make sense that they would be resistant to it. I don't know if that's supposed to be the explanation, but I thought I should mention it.
They paid me for you.
And finally, I'd like to bring up the fact that another sign exists in the books, somewhat similar to the Axii, called Somne, or Somni, or just Somn. I don't know, I think I like Somni the most. Kinda sounds like insomnia. And it certainly has a relation to that, because it can put people to sleep.
Geralt, wait. A rhyme for Witcher?
Did Itcher?
Ugh.
And I suppose the deal with it is similar to the Quen and the Heliotrope, where the game developers likely thought it's too similar to the Axii, so they didn't include it separately. Oh, and also, it's only in the Season of Storms book, right? Which actually came out after the first Witcher game? Maybe even after the second, or right around the second, I need to check.
Go ahead, check.
In fact, to bring up the Vesemir anime once again, it was heavily influenced by that book. However, they still didn't use the sign there. Perhaps a missed opportunity to have Deglan put the exorcised lady to sleep with it? But anyway, I think that's all I had. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if there was anything you missed, or perhaps anything else that I should have included, and if not, I thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my supporters and YouTube members, and until the next video, stay tuned and be good.